In this module, you'll learn a few techniques for making the transition from paper to digital ink. You'll see how painless it can actually be to make the leap. I'm going to be demonstrating on my iPad Pro using an Apple Pencil and the app Adobe Illustrator Draw. So one of the first things that I like to do is I like to create a border. And what's really cool about Adobe Illustrator Draw is it has a couple of ways that you can do this. The first one here is a little ruler, which I find really fun because you can move the ruler just the way you would an everyday ruler. It gives you a little bit of angle. And then using your pen, you can draw a straight line. Isn't this cool? And then you can move, whoops, do a little undo when I see I messed up that. And you can use the ruler to create these kinds of borders if you like. It's one easy way to do it. And a really fast way to do this, especially if you're in a hurry while you're listening to a presenter, is use the square feature. It's right up here in the Shapes menu. And this little arrow here allows you to move it in and out or to elongate it. And then, taking my pencil, I just simply trace the square and get rid of the template. The final way to do borders is really just to hand draw them. I know, that seems crazy, right? Hand draw lines. Well, here's a little technique I use for drawing a straight line. When I'm drawing a straight line is I'm really kind of keeping my eye over here. This is what I'm watching. And this is where I'm paying attention to placing my pen. And when I place my pen here, I'm literally aiming for that dot over here. So I am going to place my pen here on the dot. I'm going to aim for where I see the eyeball. And I'm also kind of gauging how far away I am from the top because I want it to sort of be even along the way. And to be perfectly honest with you, I struggle with straight lines on a tablet more than I do on paper because my hand does not slide as easily on the screen as it does when I'm on a piece of nice slick paper. So this is not a perfect line, but that's okay because all of my lines are just hand-drawn, but it doesn't matter because I can do all kinds of things to make it look a lot more interesting. Like use my eraser to create kind of a dotted look. That way it kind of tricks the eye to thinking that, oh, okay, well, it's not really supposed to be perfectly straight. And then you can do kind of fun little things in the corners too. I like to make it look like a stitch. Anything to trick the eye from thinking that everything has to be perfect, because on a digital device, while you're taking notes during a presentation, you are not trying to capture perfection. You're trying to listen and capture the content easily. So there's just kind of a couple of different ways that you can create your borders. So now let's take a look at our headers. So I'm going to use kind of the same techniques for a header as I did with the border. Using my eraser, I'm going to give some dimension to my note-taking. This will allow me to kind of create a nice little header. Now, it doesn't have to be this perfect little square. I mean, there are lots of ways you can use that watercolor brush that I introduced to you earlier. But putting a header somewhere, or even, when you're drawing and such, having things fall off the page, it just kind of gives a little bit of a fun dimension. So I can always put the little border back in. But that's kind of fun because then it looks like, it's got some dynamics to it. So let's demonstrate maybe using the watercolor brush. And I'm going to use a nice light color. I'm going to make sure my opacity is set, as we talked about earlier. And maybe, create something a little bit more dynamic and fun using that brush. Because then when you go back and you give it a title, it's just really kind of is my title. It just kind of gives a nice little colorful introduction to the notes that you're about to take. What's interesting about this watercolor brush is, do you see what happens? It overlaps. Isn't that fun? It overlaps and makes it really look dimensional. So you can even do headers, that are made up of more like pixelated dots. That's just fun. And then when you take your header, you know, have a little more fun with the font kind of type. Anyway, those make great headers as well. One thing to note about the watercolor brush, again, is when you use it and you color in something with one stroke of your pen, it stays consistent. But if you were to lift your pen, you're going to see that kind of interesting overlap. So have fun with that if you want to use that for dimension. But that's a fun way to use the watercolor tool. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at drawing some simple icons. In Module 5, Part 3, I'm going to be demonstrating a digital graphic recording. So I have a few images that I know I'm going to use in that demonstration. So I'm going to use those just to demonstrate some of the techniques and things that I pay attention to when I'm drawing on my iPad. One of the things that I pay attention to when I'm drawing that's different than drawing on paper is that the smoothness of the lines, they're always super challenging to get into a lot of detail. So I try to keep my images a lot simpler. Again, it's really just communicating a message. So for example, I know that in this interview, they're going to be talking about technology. So while I would normally draw a more detailed computer, really it's a box. I mean, depending on the type of computer you're looking at, you know, with a screen, with, you know, maybe, kind of looks like the old disk drive, doesn't it? So this will be a desktop. And something as simple as that really is all you need. Maybe a little shadow just to give it some interest. But, I mean, that is computer. So I can do a laptop. I think I've shown you this one before. But I'm not usually, sometimes I don't even really draw very specifically at all. The other thing I think they talk about is the idea of fixing, so I might practice a hammer. And you remember what I've kind of gone over with you in other modules, that honestly, everything is made up of a shape, you know? Like if I want to do a wrench, you know, it's circles and it's rectangles, you know, that's really what it is. And that's as simple as it gets when it comes to tools, maybe a nail, maybe a hammer. You know, I've never really been great at hammers, both using them and drawing them. But think basic, you know, when it comes to drawings. While it may not be literal images, I know, you know, like using metaphors. So like if they're talking about the weight of the world, you know, on these kids' shoulders, you know, just creating kind of a weight, 5 pounds, is kind of one way to communicate that message. And then sometimes it's really, you know, it's concepts. It's like parents as allies, you know, thinking about a child and the parent who's trying to support them. You know, that might be all it takes to communicate that message. Or, you know, maybe leadership, thinking about somebody being at the top of a hill, you know, leading others might just kind of simply look like that. Maybe I don't like to think about leadership and followership, but this idea that, you know, that the leader has a job to do, and that is to guide and direct and support people who are working under their purview. So I know they talk about kids feeling like they're targets in school, so I might practice myself a little target. They also talk a little bit about kids feeling safe. I might do kind of like a lifesaver, you know, for the child who feels like they're needing to feel safe. What I love about digital is that so much of it is malleable and changeable, and, you know, I don't have to... The good part about it is that I feel like that I can have freedom because I can always fix it, whereas when I'm drawing with magic markers, I kind of just have to let my mistakes be opportunities. I guess the bad thing about it is that you can also let your perfectionist tendencies get in the way. And I am generally one of those where I look at these kinds of imperfections and I want to go back and add the detail. And so I really do have to let my perfectionism go and really just kind of use more iconic images when I'm drawing. In the next module, we'll be looking at visuals gone viral.